Hey there, IT 140 students. So let's talk about the labs that you have for Module 3. And in each of these labs, you're going to be using decision structures to handle input choices to produce an output result. So in the first lab here, what we want to do is take in three values and then identify which of them is the smallest. So the logic here is that we have three different numbers, and you really need to check them against all of the others in order to know if they are the smallest. So I would probably call them num1, num2, and num3. And the first one, if I'm just starting from the top, so I would check to see if num1 is less than or equal to num2, and at the same time that it is less than or equal to num3. So in programming, it's most common where we can only handle one tested condition at a time. They can be joined using an and or an or operator, but you can't do something like this where I did num1 less than or equal to num2 less than or equal to num3. So while I know that's mathematically true, in programming we can't do something like this. So what we want to do is handle it as you see here. And so the decision type structure that I would use here, and you'll be using this for all of the for most of the assignments here, is that you'd be using an if, else structure. So if some condition, elif a next condition, and you can have as many if conditions as you want. And then keep in mind as you worked through Module 3 that the else block is the default, kind of catches everything at the end. So I would first have an if checking for num1, and then I would have an elif for num2, and so its condition is that it's less than num1, and at the same time it's less than num3. And as the code progresses there, if this statement wasn't true, and if the conditions for num2 being the smallest weren't true, then that means num3 has to be the smallest, just like what we have here. So 7, while it's less than 15, 7 is not less than 3. And then if we were to go to the next one, 15 is not less than 7, so this would not be true, which means 3 has to be the smallest one. And so we can write just a simple else block to handle that case then. So let's take a look at the next one. And so here in the next one, what we want to do is take a month and the day of the month and identify whether it is spring, summer, autumn, or winter. So let's talk about the first part of this. This is kind of the easy part where we take the month and day and then output the season. So let's do the really, really simple one. So for instance, January. So if we know it's January, we should be getting winter. Same thing with February. If we get a February in here, we should get winter. Now, they do want us to validate the string and the integer day of the month. So for instance, blue is not one of the months, so we can't have that. 65, let's say that this was January 65, that would be invalid because we know that January stops at 31. So the idea that you're going to have to put into place here is going to be something like this, where you're going to have to check to see. So if input month is January, so if that's the case, the other part that you need to do is you need to check the input day. Has to be less than or equal to 31. And at the same time, it's got to be greater than or equal to 1. So that would be the case that we have a January month. If we have a February month, again, same kind of idea. The code that we want to use here is you could have 29 days in a leap year, so you can go ahead and make that a 29. We're not going to worry about, checking if it is a leap year, but you could have a 29 here. And again, same deal, it would have to be greater than or equal to 1. But then where it gets a little interesting is if we have March. So if March, if we have that case, then we need to check whether it's between 1 and 20 for spring. So if it's between 1 and 20, that would be spring. If it's between 20, oops, sorry, I did the wrong thing. Sorry, not spring. 1 and 19 is winter. If I can get my logic right here. So 1 and 19 is winter. 20 through it is 31 days in March. So that would be spring. So if that's the case, that's what we have. And so as we go through here, I would have for January, this would be one line right here. This is all of this would be a tested condition. The next one, if I had March, then inside of it, I'd have an if, else if condition. So I'm going to have if it's March, and then inside of that, if the day is between 1 and 19, otherwise, if it's between 20 and 31. And so I hope you're kind of getting that idea there. Now, let's kind of talk about these input values here. So you're going to have one for January, February, March, and so forth. So at the very end, if we get all the way down to the very end, if we've checked every single month, what we're going to have is we're going to have an invalid case. Okay, so if we get through and none of the tested conditions are true, that means it's invalid, which really means that we didn't put in a valid month. Okay, reason I'm saying that here is we're checking the input day right here. Okay, we checked and validated that January right here was between 1 and 31. Same idea with February. I'd have a very similar line, except it's going to be 29. But what about this March condition here? So I'd have an if, else if, and then I would have an else right here that this right here is invalid. So if I get to this point right here, while March was a valid month, I didn't get a valid value for it. So that'd be kind of the logic that I would go with for this lab here. Again, you're kind of free to implement it your own way, but that's what I would do for this one.